An innocent young woman, a millionaire with a dark past and a whispered promise, "You'll remember this moment forever." But what he hid from her in that first glance almost destroyed them both. "Tell me, where are you watching from?" Because what happened after those words no one expected. Subscribe to the channel and leave a like to find out if this love survived the truth. Horror turned into tragedy. The white cotton dress swayed gently in the Appalachian breeze as Laurel gazed at the horizon from the veranda of the Oak Ridge Inn in Asheville. Her hands, weathered from years of working with flowers and soil, firmly held a cup of chamomile tea that contrasted with the fragility of her thoughts. At 28, she had never imagined finding herself at such an emotional crossroads, watching as the setting sun bathed the historic buildings in golden and reddish hues, like the flames consuming her inner certainty. The most meaningful encounters tend to happen at the most unexpected moments and places, her grandmother Hazel used to say on countless occasions, as if she had foreseen what would happen that spring day at the Charleston flower market. 3 months earlier, Laurel Reed embodied the quintessential modern American woman, independent yet rooted in centuries-old traditions, owner of a small but thriving flower shop in Charleston's historic district, and possessor of a unique talent for creating floral arrangements that, according to her customers, spoke directly to the soul. Her life unfolded amidst the intoxicating aroma of jasmine, the colorful explosion of dogwoods in her backyard, and animated conversations with regular customers who had become more like extended family than buyers. Everything changed that April morning, when Charleston's cobblestone streets were awakening after the annual literary festival. Amidst the market's bustle, he appeared, Griffin Montgomery, heir to one of America's most significant fortunes, a relentless entrepreneur in the hospitality sector, whose imposing presence contrasted with the environment's simplicity. Dressed in a tailored Italian suit that revealed his status without words, he surveyed the stalls with the critical eye of someone accustomed to evaluating and acquiring. Fate, that unpredictable master of ceremonies, orchestrated their meeting with almost mathematical precision. Griffin was seeking a floral arrangement supplier for the inauguration of his new boutique hotel in the historic district. An old friend's recommendation had led him to Laurel's stall, where he became momentarily paralyzed at the sight of this woman with deep, honey-colored eyes, arranging lilies with the delicacy of someone caressing something precious. "Excuse me," his deep voice broke Laurel's concentration. "I've been told you're the best florist in Charleston." She looked up, and something inexplicable vibrated between them, like an invisible cord suddenly tensed. "Whoever told you that is exaggerating, sir. I'm just someone who loves what they do," she responded with that disarming honesty that characterized her every action. The conversation flowed with surprising naturalness between two people from such disparate worlds. He, educated at the finest international schools, accustomed to moving among America's business elite. She, formed in the University of Life, amid family warmth and daily effort. Nevertheless, they shared something essential that transcended any social barrier, a genuine passion for authentic beauty and work well done. At the end of that first conversation, Laurel had secured a contract to decorate the season's most anticipated inauguration, and Griffin, though he didn't yet know it, had experienced the first encounter with the person who would challenge each of his established principles. As the sun finished hiding behind the Blue Ridge Mountains surrounding Asheville, Laurel took a final sip of her now-cold tea. The memory of that first meeting seemed as distant as the stars beginning to appear in the Appalachian firmament. The decision she needed to make before dawn would irrevocably change the course of two lives intertwined by the most unexpected of feelings. A love that had blossomed against all odds, like those stubborn plants that find their way between pavement cracks, defying the logic of their very existence. The inauguration of the Magnolia Springs Hotel was exactly the dazzling event everyone expected. Charleston's high society moved with studied elegance among hardwood columns and colonial-inspired verandas, while waiters in impeccable uniforms offered champagne flutes and delicate gourmet canapés. Laurel observed discreetly from a corner, satisfied with the result of 3 days of intense work. Her floral creations, bold compositions that mixed Southern tradition with contemporary touches, adorned each strategic space, transforming the already magnificent historic mansion into something almost magical. "You've transformed my hotel into an enchanted garden," Griffin's voice surprised her from behind, making her start slightly. "Sorry, I didn't mean to startle you." "You didn't startle me, I was just absorbed," she replied, turning to meet those dark eyes that seemed to contain a universe of secrets. "Would you mind accompanying me for a moment? I want to show you something." Laurel followed him through the bustling party to a private balcony overlooking Charleston Harbor, where the full moon silvered the water's surface. Griffin personally uncorked a champagne bottle he had kept on ice. "I want to propose something to you," he said, as he filled 2 glasses. "Not a toast, but a permanent collaboration." The proposal sounded like a dream, becoming the official florist for all his hotels, with a generous budget and complete creative freedom. For someone whose small business struggled month to month to stay afloat, it was a life-changing opportunity. However, something inside warned her that accepting would mean much more than a simple business agreement. "I need to think about it," she finally responded, surprising herself as much as him. "I appreciate your offer, but I can't decide something like this in the middle of a celebration." A shadow of bewilderment crossed Griffin's face. He wasn't accustomed to his proposals being received with hesitation. "Of course, take your time," he conceded with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, though I must confess I was expecting an immediate yes. The rest of the evening unfolded like an intricate dance between them. While Laurel received congratulations from guests impressed by her work, she constantly felt Griffin's gaze following her across the room. When she finally said goodbye past midnight, he insisted on personally escorting her to the taxi. "I await your response with interest," he said as he closed the vehicle's door, leaning slightly to add, "and not just for professional reasons." That night, lying in her bed in the modest apartment above her shop in the historic district, Laurel couldn't sleep. The professional proposal was merely the surface of something deeper beginning to form, and her self-preservation instinct battled against an attraction that seemed as inevitable as gravity itself. Her phone vibrated with a message. "The hotel garden seems empty without you. Breakfast tomorrow. G." The first crack had just appeared in the careful barrier Laurel had built around her heart after years of disappointments. A small but significant crack, like those almost imperceptible fissures that precede the collapse of seemingly unbreakable structures. Breakfast turned into lunches, lunches into dinners, and before she could consciously process it, Laurel found herself living a double life. In the mornings, she continued being Charleston's florist, tending her shop with the same dedication as always, chatting with neighbors and preparing arrangements for local weddings and family celebrations. In the afternoons and evenings, however, she entered Griffin's exclusive universe. Michelin-starred restaurants where the waiters knew her by name, private exhibitions in galleries that appeared in no tourist guide, intimate concerts in courtyards of historic mansions. Their relationship, oscillating in an ambiguous territory between professional and personal, provoked mixed reactions in her circle. Phoebe, her assistant at the flower shop and childhood friend, didn't hide her concern. "He's taking you into a world that isn't yours, Laurel," she warned one afternoon as they prepared centerpieces for a quinceañera. "When he tires of playing fairy tale with you, what will be left?" "It's not a game," Laurel protested, though part of her resonated with her friend's concern. "Besides, I can handle my own romantic affairs, thank you." "Darling, it's not about your feelings, it's about his. Men like him don't fall in love with women like us. They turn us into anecdotes for their memoirs." Phoebe's words lodged like thorns in her consciousness, persisting even when, that same night, she found herself dining on the private rooftop of Griffin's apartment, with the Charleston skyline illuminated as a backdrop, and wearing a designer dress he had sent to her apartment as a suggestion for the evening. "You're unusually quiet tonight," he observed, pouring her more wine. "Problems at the shop?" "Not exactly." Laurel toyed with the rim of her glass. "Griffin, what are we doing?" The question hung between them like a musical note refusing to fade. He set down his glass with deliberate slowness before answering. "I thought it was obvious. We're getting to know each other. And what comes after? Because we come from completely different worlds. Your mother is personal friends with former First Ladies, for heaven's sake. My father was a construction worker his entire life." An enigmatic smile formed on Griffin's face. "Do you really think that matters to me?" He extended his hand across the table to hold hers. "What fascinates me about you, Laurel, is precisely your authenticity. I live surrounded by people who calculate every word, every gesture, seeking advantages. You're like a breath of fresh air in a stale environment. The words sounded sincere, but something in their formulation disturbed Laurel. Was she then a sort of social experiment for him? A form of rebellion against his privileged environment? Before she could delve deeper, Griffin's phone vibrated. After reading the message, his expression changed completely. "I need to go," he announced, rising abruptly. "Urgent matters in New York. My driver will take you home." The farewell was brief and distant, leaving her with a sense of bewilderment that transformed into anguish when, for the next 5 days, Griffin disappeared completely. No calls, no messages, as if those weeks of intense connection had been a product of her imagination. It was on the 6th day, while arranging lilies for a funeral, that the shop bell announced the arrival of Eleanor Montgomery, Griffin's mother. Tall, elegant, with that aristocratic thinness that seems to defy the passage of time, she surveyed the small shop with a critical eye before addressing Laurel directly. "So you're the famous florist?" Her tone converted the compliment into something close to an insult. "My son seems quite impressed with your work." "Mrs. Montgomery, what a surprise," Laurel responded, wiping her hands on her apron. "Can I help you with a floral arrangement?" "Oh dear, I'm not here as a customer." Eleanor extracted an envelope from her leather handbag. "I'm here to offer you a check for a considerable amount in exchange for you staying away from my son permanently." The world seemed to stop around Laurel. Of all the possible scenes she had imagined during Griffin's absence, none came remotely close to the humiliation she felt at this moment. "You can save your money and your insult, ma'am," she responded with a dignity that emerged from the depths of her being. "I'm not for sale, and now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do." "Don't be naive, girl," Eleanor insisted, leaving the envelope on the counter. "My son has been engaged to Audrey Harrington for years, a marriage that will unite two of America's most important fortunes. Whatever you believe you have with him is a passing fancy. Think about it." After Eleanor's departure, Laurel remained motionless by the counter, her gaze fixed on the envelope that seemed to burn her skin. Outside, life continued. Tourists photographing the cobblestone streets, neighbors chatting animatedly, a musician playing a nostalgic melody. Inside, however, her entire world was crumbling like a house of cards struck by the cruelest of realities. The storm arrived in Charleston that night, with a fury that seemed to reflect Laurel's inner turmoil. Seated by the window of her apartment, she watched the raindrops violently strike the glass as the city lights flickered beneath the lightning's onslaught. The envelope with the check remained untouched on the table, a tangible reminder of her naivety. The doorbell rang 3 times before she decided to rise. Upon opening the door, she found herself facing an unrecognizable Griffin, soaked by the rain, with hair plastered to his face and an expression of anguish she had never seen before. "My mother came to see you." It wasn't a question, but a desperate statement. "Laurel, whatever she told you, is it true you're engaged?" she interrupted, her voice surprisingly firm despite the knot in her throat. Griffin's silence was more eloquent than any explanation. "Technically," he finally began, running a hand through his wet hair, "there's an arrangement between families that was made when we were teenagers, but—" "But what?" Laurel stepped back when he tried to approach. "Were you going to mention this at some point between the romantic dinners and expensive gifts, or perhaps after taking me to your bed?" Anger, pain, and shame mixed inside her like a toxic potion. She had trusted, had lowered her defenses, had begun to believe in something that turned out to be an elaborate illusion. "It's not what you're thinking," he insisted, with a desperation that seemed genuine. "Audrey and I grew up together. Our families have been linked for generations. The engagement is a formality I've always tried to postpone because I've never felt for her what—" he paused, searching for the right words, "what I've begun to feel for you. And why did you disappear these past days? Why didn't you call me even once?" "Because Audrey showed up in New York unannounced. Because my mother threatened to disinherit me if I didn't get in line. Because I've been fighting against everything I was taught my life should be in order to offer you something real, something not contaminated by others' expectations or obsolete traditions." The sincerity in his voice made Laurel's determination waver. For a moment she allowed herself to imagine that a future really was possible between them, that the social and cultural abyss separating them could be crossed by a bridge built with authentic feelings. "Your mother offered me money to stay away from you," she finally said, pointing to the envelope on the table. As if I were a gold digger who could be bought. Griffin's expression hardened. For the first time, Laurel glimpsed in him the relentless businessman who had built an empire by expanding the family legacy, the man accustomed to obtaining what he wanted through a combination of intelligence and inflexible determination. "My mother has no right to interfere in my personal life," he pronounced, with a coldness that contrasted with the passion of moments before. "And nobody, absolutely nobody, has the right to try to buy you." "That's not the point, Griffin," Laurel sighed, suddenly exhausted. "The point is that this, whatever is happening between us, is doomed from the start. We belong to completely different realities." "That's precisely what everyone expects us to think," he approached again, this time managing to take her hands in his. "Don't you see we're following a script written by others? You believing you're not enough for my world, me trapped in commitments I never chose." A lightning bolt illuminated the room, casting dramatic shadows across their faces. In that moment of supernatural clarity, Laurel made a decision that would irrevocably alter the course of both their lives. "I need time," she declared, gently withdrawing her hands. "I can't think clearly when you're around. If there really is something genuine between us, it will survive distance and reflection." "How much time?" he asked with evident fear in his voice. "1 month, without seeing each other, without communicating. You decide what you really want from your life, and I decide what I'm willing to risk for something that might not have a future." The proposal floated between them like a sentence. Griffin observed her at length, as if memorizing every detail of her face before a prolonged absence. 1 month, then," he finally conceded. "But promise me one thing. You won't make any decisions based on what others tell you is possible or impossible. Decide only with your heart." When the door closed behind him, Laurel allowed herself, for the first time since Eleanor's visit, to release the tears she had been holding back. The rain continued to lash Charleston, washing the streets of a city that had witnessed impossible loves for centuries, from Native American princesses and European settlers to their own, equally improbable in the 21st century. The month of separation proved to be an emotional roller coaster for Laurel. The first days passed in a fog of doubts and uncertainties, where each ring of the shop door accelerated her heart with the hope it might be Griffin breaking his promise. But he kept his word, and gradually a strange clarity began to emerge amid the confusion. The flower shop, always her refuge, became the center of a personal transformation. While her hands worked mechanically among stems and petals, her mind processed each moment shared with Griffin, each word, each implicit promise, seeking the truth hidden beneath layers of illusion. "You've changed the window display 3 times this week," Phoebe observed one afternoon, as they placed new arrangements in the shop window, "and each time more spectacular than the last. Are you trying to impress someone or exorcise demons?" Laurel smiled at her friend's insight. "Maybe both," she admitted, adjusting a rebellious orchid. "Or maybe I'm just rediscovering who I am, when I'm not dazzled by lights that don't belong to my world." The 3rd week brought an unexpected opportunity. Rowan Blackwell, a renowned garden designer who had admired her work at the Magnolia Springs Hotel inauguration, proposed she collaborate on an ambitious project, creating an ephemeral garden for the International Garden Festival at Longwood Gardens, an event that attracted landscape enthusiasts from around the world. "It's a revolutionary concept," Rowan explained in the small cafe across from the shop, "a contemporary American garden that respects centuries-old traditions but incorporates sustainable techniques and native plants at risk. Your sensibility would be perfect for the project." The proposal represented exactly what she needed, a professional challenge that would force her out of her comfort zone without abandoning her roots. During the following days, she immersed herself completely in researching and planning the project, visiting specialized nurseries, consulting with university botanists, sketching designs until the early hours of the morning. It was during one of these nighttime work sessions that she had an epiphany. Contemplating the garden plans she had drawn, a harmonious fusion of traditional and contemporary elements, she understood that this same philosophy could apply to her personal life. She didn't have to choose between being faithful to her origins or opening herself to new experiences. True wisdom resided in creating a balance that honored both aspects. On the 28th day of her self-imposed separation, she made her decision. She wouldn't passively wait for Griffin to return with an answer. She herself had a proposal to make, a vision of the future built from her own strength and not from need or insecurity. For the first time in weeks she slept deeply, without disturbing dreams. The morning of the 30th day dawned radiant, with that spring sun that seems to gild every surface of Charleston. Laurel opened the shop as on any other day, attended to her regular customers, and supervised an order for a wedding at St. Michael's Church. Only the slight tremor of her hands as she arranged a bouquet of anthuriums revealed the inner storm she was trying to control. At 7 o'clock sharp, as she closed the cash register, the shop bell announced the arrival of a new customer. Looking up, her heart leapt. There stood Griffin, dressed with surprising simplicity, jeans and a white shirt with rolled-up sleeves, holding a single red rose as a silent offering. "Exactly 30 days, he said with a nervous half-smile. "I could have waited until midnight, but every minute away from you became unbearable." Laurel slowly circled the counter, aware that each step brought her closer to a point of no return. "Before you say anything," she preempted, with a determination that surprised them both, "I want you to know that I've made my own decisions these days. I'm not going to ask what you've decided about us until you hear what I have to propose." The surprise on Griffin's face gave way to an expression of genuine curiosity and interest. "I'm listening," he responded, handing her the rose like passing a baton in a relay race. "I want us to build something together, but in our own way," Laurel began, her voice growing firmer. "I don't want to be absorbed into your world, nor do I expect you to abandon everything you are. What I propose is creating a new space, where we both can grow without renouncing our essence." She extracted a small flash drive from her pocket and extended it toward him. "Here's my proposal for a joint project. A line of boutique inns based on historic American gardens, where my knowledge of local flora and design combines with your expertise in luxury hospitality. Something authentic, sustainable, and unique that we couldn't create separately." The silence that followed seemed to contain the weight of all future possibilities. Griffin took the flash drive as if it were a fragile relic, his eyes fixed on Laurel's with a mixture of amazement and something deeper she couldn't quite decipher. "Before responding to your proposal," he finally said, "I need to show you something." From his pocket he extracted a small, crumpled envelope that Laurel immediately recognized. It was the same one Eleanor had left on her counter, with the check intended to distance her from his son. Only now, upon opening it, it contained something completely different, a newspaper clipping announcing the breaking off of the engagement between Griffin Montgomery and Audrey Harrington. "The decision was made well before this month," he explained. "I just needed time to handle the consequences. My mother is furious, my father disappointed, and I'll probably lose some important business partners. But for the first time in my life, I feel I'm choosing my own path." He took Laurel's hands in his with that mixture of vulnerability and determination she had come to associate uniquely with him. "Your proposal is brilliant, and nothing would make me happier than building something together. But I want you to know that, with or without a joint project, my choice is you. Not for what we might create professionally, but for who I am when I'm with you. Simply myself without surnames or expectations." The distance between them vanished in an embrace that seemed to contain all the tension, doubt, and hope accumulated during 30 days of separation. Outside, Charleston continued its imperturbable rhythm, oblivious to the small miracle occurring in a modest flower shop in the historic district, where two seemingly irreconcilable worlds finally found common ground on which to flourish together. News of the collaboration between Laurel Reed, Charleston's florist, and Griffin Montgomery, heir to America's most prestigious hotel empire, spread through the city with the speed of a wildfire in dry field. What had begun as a rumor in neighborhood circles soon appeared in the society pages of local newspapers, and finally, in national trend magazines. The first joint project, the transformation of an old tobacco plantation in the Blue Ridge Mountains into a garden inn celebrating native flora, was progressing at a good pace. Laurel had temporarily transferred her operations center to the property, converting one of the old barns into an experimental nursery where she cultivated uncommon species for the future gardens. It was there, among redwood seedlings and dogwood cuttings, where she received the first sign that the chosen path would not be free of obstacles. "They've cancelled our credit," Griffin announced one morning, entering the nursery with a somber expression. The bank says the project is too experimental to justify the investment. Laurel set the watering can on the work table, immediately understanding what was happening. It's your mother, isn't it? She has contacts at that bank. Griffin nodded, the frustration evident in the tension of his jaw. Apparently, my rebellion must have consequences. She's using all her influence to sabotage the project. The blow was significant, but not lethal. Griffin had resources of his own, and although it meant adjusting the budget and delaying some phases, the project could continue. However, the message was clear. The war declared by Eleanor Montgomery was just beginning. The following months unfolded in a strange duality. On one hand, their personal relationship blossomed into an intimacy neither had experienced before. They discovered together the pleasure of simple things, waking to bird song at the estate, cooking traditional dishes following recipes from Laurel's grandmother, spending entire afternoons discussing ideas for future projects, or simply reading in silent companionship under the ancient magnolias. On the other hand, professional obstacles multiplied. Suppliers who suddenly doubled their prices or cancelled contracts without explanation, articles in specialized press questioning the concept's viability, even an attempt to sabotage the nursery's irrigation system that would have destroyed months of work if Laurel hadn't detected the manipulation in time. "We should talk to her," Laurel suggested one night as they dined on the veranda under a starry sky. "Explain that this isn't a whim, that we're serious." "My mother isn't someone who lets herself be convinced with words," Griffin responded, pouring himself more wine. "She only respects results, demonstrable success, and even then, to her I'll always be the boy who should follow the path she laid out." "Everyone deserves a chance to change," Laurel insisted, faithful to her belief in people's essential goodness. "Maybe if she really got to know me, if she saw what we're creating together." Griffin's skeptical expression softened at his partner's unshakable optimism. It was precisely this capacity to see possibilities where others saw only problems that had transformed his worldview. "All right," he finally conceded. "I'll arrange a dinner on neutral ground, but don't expect miracles." The dinner took place at the Lookout restaurant, an elegant establishment overlooking Charleston Harbor. Laurel had carefully chosen her attire, a navy blue dress of classic cut that had belonged to her mother, complemented by a single adornment, a silver brooch in the shape of a jasmine flower that Griffin had given her in their first month together. Eleanor Montgomery arrived with the aristocratic punctuality that characterized her, wrapped in a Chanel that probably cost more than all the furniture in Laurel's apartment. Her expression upon seeing the young florist was inscrutable, a mask of social courtesy, perfected during decades of high-level events. "Miss Reed," she greeted with a barely perceptible nod, "I see you persist in your association with my son." "Mother," Griffin intervened, formally kissing Eleanor's cheek, "thank you for accepting this dinner. It means a lot to us." The first courses passed in superficial conversation carefully orchestrated by Griffin, comments about recent exhibitions, cultural news, innocuous childhood anecdotes. Laurel participated discreetly, observing the dynamic between mother and son with a mixture of fascination and sadness. The complicated love that existed between them was evident, buried beneath layers of expectations and misunderstandings. It was during the main course when Eleanor finally addressed the true purpose of the meeting. "I've heard your project is encountering financial difficulties," she commented with studied indifference, delicately cutting a piece of sea base. "A real shame." "The difficulties are temporary," Griffin responded calmly. "The concept is solid, and we have alternative investors interested." "Darling, let's be frank." Eleanor set her cutlery on the plate with millimetric precision. "This experiment of yours is damaging the family brand's prestige. Montgomery Hotels represents exclusivity, tradition, proven excellence. What you propose is a dilettante concept, without real commercial trajectory." "With all due respect, Mrs. Montgomery," Laurel intervened, unable to contain herself any longer, "I believe you're judging without really knowing the project. We've developed a model that combines sustainability with authentic luxury, experiences that cannot be replicated. International trends clearly point toward—" "Trends?" Eleanor interrupted with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Trends are fleeting, Miss Reed. Empires are built on immutable principles, not ephemeral fashions." "Then perhaps it's time to evolve." Griffin's voice acquired a cutting edge. The world changes, Mother. Those who don't adapt are relegated to irrelevance, however glorious their past may have been. The tension that followed could have been cut with a knife. Laurel observed the silent duel between mother and son, aware she was witnessing the culmination of years of latent conflict. "You've always been stubborn," Eleanor finally said, regaining her composure. "Your father used to say it was your best quality and your worst defect." She paused, studying Laurel with renewed attention, as if seeing her for the first time. "Miss Reed, I have nothing personal against you. My only interest is protecting the family legacy and my son." "I understand," Laurel responded with sincerity, "and believe me, I deeply respect what you and your family have built. We don't intend to destroy it, but to enrich it, to take it in directions you might not have contemplated." Something indefinable fleetingly crossed Eleanor's eyes, a flash of recognition or perhaps reluctant respect. "Time will tell if my son has made the right decision," she concluded, recovering her distant tone. "Meanwhile, I wish you clarity in your path." The dinner concluded shortly after, with appropriate formalities, but no significant advances. In the taxi back to the estate, Laurel rested her head on Griffin's shoulder, processing what had occurred. "We can't expect her to change her mind overnight," he murmured, kissing her hair. "But at least she's seen we're serious, that this isn't a passing fancy." "There's pain in her," Laurel observed. "It's not just rigidity or prejudice. It's as if she fears losing something precious. My father always said Mother had sacrificed her own dreams to maintain the family legacy. Perhaps what she really fears is that I'll choose a different path than the one she didn't allow herself to take." As the taxi advanced through Charleston's illuminated streets, leaving behind the restaurant where perhaps a tiny seed of future understanding had been sown, Laurel understood that the true test for their relationship wouldn't be external obstacles, but the capacity of both to remain faithful to their shared vision without losing sight of what truly mattered, the authenticity they had found together, that sacred space where both could simply be themselves. The news arrived like a cold shower on an October morning, when the Garden Inn project was just weeks away from its inauguration. Griffin entered the nursery where Laurel was supervising the final floral arrangements for the opening event, his face pale and tense. "Rowan has sold the vertical garden design to Harrington Hotels," he announced without preamble, extending a tablet displaying an article from a hospitality industry magazine. Laurel dropped the pruning shears she was holding. Rowan Blackwell, the landscape architect with whom she had collaborated at the Longwood Gardens Festival and who had subsequently joined their project, appeared smiling alongside Audrey Harrington, Griffin's ex-fiancée, announcing the opening of an innovative Garden Inn concept in the Hamptons, scheduled to open 1 week before theirs. "This can't be," she murmured, scrolling through the article with increasing incredulity. "The designs, the selected species, even the sustainable irrigation system, it's all our work." "Not exactly." Griffin ran a hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. "Technically, we never registered the intellectual property of the complete concept. And Rowan was a partner. He had access to all the plans and specifications." The betrayal was especially painful for Laurel. Rowan had been a mentor, someone she had fully trusted. Their initial collaboration at Longwood had been so fluid that incorporating him into the Inn project had seemed natural. She had never suspected he might be leaking information to the competition, much less to the Harrington family, whose commercial enmity with the Montgomerys was legendary in the sector. "Do you think your mother is behind this?" she asked, trying to process the magnitude of the blow. Griffin slowly shook his head. "Audrey doesn't need my mother's help to try to destroy me. This has her personal seal, calculated to cause maximum damage, not just economically, but also to our credibility. When we open, it will seem we've copied their concept, not the other way around." The following days were a whirlwind of emergency meetings with lawyers, advisors, and the communication team. The options were limited. They could try legal actions, but the procedures would be slow and the immediate damage would be done. They could advance the inauguration, but sacrificing quality and crucial details. Or they could maintain the original course, trusting that the authenticity of their project would prevail in the long term over the copied version. The tension began to filter into their personal relationship. For the first time since they had been together, they argued frequently, sometimes over insignificant details that masked the true source of anxiety, the fear that everything they had fought for might crumble. One particularly difficult night, after a heated discussion about marketing strategies, Laurel went out to walk alone through the estate's magnolia grove. The full moon illuminated the landscape with an almost supernatural clarity, projecting intricate shadows among the centuries-old trees. Without conscious direction, her steps led her to the small creek that crossed the property, where she sat on a flat rock listening to the constant murmur of the water. The familiar sound transported her to her childhood in a small Appalachian town, when her grandfather would take her fishing and tell her stories about how the magnolias were silent witnesses to generations of Americans, surviving droughts, floods, and regime changes with the same silent tenacity. "The magnolia's root is more important than its branches, Laurel," the old man used to say. "Even if it loses all its leaves in a storm, if the root is strong, it will bloom again." That night, under the Blue Ridge's starry sky, Laurel had her second great epiphany. They had been focusing on the branches, the inauguration, the competition, public perception, neglecting the root, the original purpose that had given life to the project, the shared vision that had united them. When she returned to the house, she found Griffin on the veranda, contemplating the same sky with a tormented expression. Without words, she sat beside him and took his hand. "We're losing our essence," she finally said, "letting others define who we are and what we represent." Griffin looked at her with surprise, as if she had expressed exactly what he himself had been thinking without being able to articulate it. "We're not going to advance the inauguration," Laurel continued with renewed determination, "nor are we going to wear ourselves out in immediate legal battles. We're going to do exactly what we planned from the beginning, but with one fundamental difference." "Which is?" he asked, intrigued by the renewed gleam in his partner's eyes. "We're going to invite the press for an exclusive tour of the gardens in development. We'll show the original design notebooks, dated and documented. We'll tell the real story, how the idea was born, how each concept evolved. We won't directly accuse anyone, but we'll let the facts speak for themselves." "It's risky," Griffin observed, though a spark of interest had replaced the desperation in his gaze. "Exposing ourselves like this could backfire. Or it could completely distinguish us from them," Laurel counter-argued. "Radical transparency as a strategy. While they hide their sources, we reveal our complete creative process. It's consistent with our philosophy of authenticity." The strategy was bold, but also deeply aligned with the values that had defined their collaboration from the beginning. During the following weeks, they transformed what could have been a devastating crisis into an opportunity to reaffirm their vision. The journalists who visited the developing project were impressed not only by the innovative beauty of the gardens, but also by the evident passion and deep knowledge Laurel demonstrated in explaining each detail. The story of the Harringtons' inspiration began to change in specialized circles, with uncomfortable questions about their concept's originality. When finally, 3 months later, they inaugurated the Moonlight Garden Inn on the originally planned date, public perception had already shifted in their favor. What Rowan and the Harringtons hadn't understood was that they could copy the plans, plant species, and even the irrigation system, but they couldn't replicate the soul of the project, the unique fusion of Laurel's artistic sensibility with Griffin's humanized business vision. As an influential hotel critic had said after visiting both establishments, "The difference is like that between hearing a score interpreted by a computer or by a virtuoso who puts their heart into every note." On the night of the inauguration, while guests toured the gardens marveling at the handcrafted lantern illumination, Griffin found Laurel seated beside the central fountain, momentarily apart from the bustle. "This is just the beginning, isn't it?" he asked, sitting beside her. "Of something much bigger than us," she nodded, contemplating the water dancing in the fountain, creating hypnotic patterns under the moonlight. "You know what's most beautiful? That this crisis made us better, not bitter. It returned us to our essence when it could have diverted us." Griffin took her hand, intertwining his fingers with hers, in a gesture that had become his personal way of communicating what words couldn't fully express. "My mother called this afternoon," he commented with a casual tone that didn't manage to hide the fact's importance. "She said she had read the reviews, that perhaps she had underestimated the concept's potential." Laurel smiled, recognizing what that small comment meant in the Montgomery universe. The first tentative step toward a possible reconciliation, a veiled acknowledgement that perhaps, just perhaps, Griffin had correctly chosen his own path. "All in good time," she responded, resting her head on his shoulder. "Magnolias don't grow in a day." The success of Moonlight Garden Inn exceeded all expectations. In less than 6 months, it had become a must-visit destination for discerning travelers seeking authentic and sustainable experiences. The rooms were booked months in advance. International design and hospitality magazines published extensive reports on its revolutionary concept, and they had begun to receive proposals to replicate the model in other American regions and even abroad. To any outside observer, Laurel and Griffin were living a golden moment, the perfect culmination of their bold personal and professional gamble. The internal reality, however, was beginning to show disturbing fissures that neither dared to fully name. The frantic work pace had gradually transformed their relationship. Leisurely conversations under the magnolias had been replaced by brief professional exchanges, shared breakfasts on the veranda, by quick meals between meetings, nights of intimacy by exhausted good nights before falling into bed. Without realizing it, they had allowed the project's success to consume the time and emotional space they previously dedicated to nurturing their personal connection. Laurel was the first to notice the symptoms. One morning, while supervising the pruning of the central garden's ornamental hedges, she realized she couldn't remember the last time she had seen Griffin laugh. That man who had learned to enjoy simple pleasures, who had discovered with her the joy of getting his hands dirty with soil or sharing a homemade quiche under a magnolia, seemed to have gradually disappeared, replaced by a tense and distant version of himself, perpetually focused on spreadsheets and growth projections. The turning point came during the visit of an important investor group interested in financing the concept's international expansion. Griffin had organized a business dinner at the inn's restaurant, where Laurel would present her vision for future thematic gardens, adapted to different climates and cultural traditions. "Why did you change the designs I prepared?" she asked him in a low but tense voice, reviewing the presentations moments before dinner. "These aren't my original concepts." "I optimized them," Griffin responded, without looking up from his tablet. "Your designs were beautiful but impractical for scaled implementation. We've reduced the variety of species, standardized maintenance systems, and simplified the aesthetic to make it more accessible to diverse markets." "Accessible?" Incredulity tinged her voice. "You've eliminated precisely what makes each design unique, its connection with local flora, with each region's landscaping traditions. You've turned them into generic products." Griffin finally looked up, and what Laurel saw in his eyes frightened her. There was no malice or calculated coldness, but the same expression she had observed in him during that first night at the Magnolia Springs Hotel before their relationship began. The look of someone trapped in familiar patterns, unable to see alternatives. "It's what the market demands, Laurel," he explained, with a patient tone that only intensified her frustration. "We can't replicate this garden's complexity at each location. It would be financially unsustainable." "Since when are our decisions based exclusively on what the market demands?" she replied, trying to maintain her composure. "We created this project precisely to demonstrate there's an alternative path, that authenticity and sustainability can also be commercially viable." "And we've demonstrated that," he interrupted her. "Now we must be practical if we want to grow. We can't afford romanticism at this stage." The word romanticism fell between them like a stone in still waters, creating ripples of disturbance expanding in all directions. It wasn't just about commercial decisions anymore. It was a fundamental rift in the vision they had built together. The dinner proceeded in an atmosphere of forced cordiality. Laurel professionally presented the modified designs, though each word tasted like betrayal of her own principles. Griffin directed the conversation with his usual strategic intelligence, and the investors seemed impressed. Outwardly, everything functioned perfectly. Inwardly, something crucial was crumbling. That night, when all the guests had departed, Laurel found Griffin in his office, still working despite the late hour. She paused in the doorway, observing this man she loved and who, paradoxically, seemed to be moving further from her with each success they shared. "I'm losing you," she finally said without preamble. "We're losing what made us special." Griffin looked up, weariness evident in the lines of his face. You're dramatizing, Laurel. We're just adapting to a new phase. No, we're repeating exactly what we swore to avoid, she insisted, entering the room. You're becoming the person you were before we met, and I'm letting my ideas, my vision, be diluted by not confronting you. A heavy silence settled between them. Griffin slowly closed his laptop, as if he needed time to process the accusation. Maybe you're right, he finally admitted, rubbing his eyes. These months have been so intense that it's easy to revert to familiar patterns, to safe territory. Safe territory for you is control, efficiency above creativity, scale above authenticity. Laurel sat across from him. And I understand, those values allowed you to survive in your world. But I believed we'd decided to create something different together. And we have, he protested. Look what we've achieved in less than a year. What we've achieved is in danger of becoming exactly what we wanted to transform. Her voice softened. It's not just about the inn or the gardens, Griffin. It's about us, what we represent together. The silence that followed contained all the unresolved tensions, unexpressed fears, growing doubts about whether it was really possible to sustain something authentic in a world that constantly pushed toward standardization and scale. I need time to think, Laurel finally said, rising. I'm going to spend a few days in Charleston in my old apartment. Alarm crossed Griffin's face, momentarily replacing exhaustion. Are you ending things with us? No, she responded with sincerity. I'm trying to save what we have before it's too late, but I can't do it alone, and I can't do it here, where everything pushes us toward roles we didn't choose. That night, as she packed a small suitcase with essentials, Laurel felt a weight in her chest that had nothing to do with conventional sadness. It was more the oppressive sensation of being at a crucial crossroads, where each possible path implied some kind of loss. Remaining together in the current direction meant gradually losing the essence of their shared vision. Separating meant renouncing a love that had profoundly transformed them both. As the taxi took her back to Charleston in the early morning, watching how the magnolia groves gradually gave way to the urban landscape, Laurel wondered if there might be a third path she couldn't yet clearly visualize, a solution that would honor both her creative integrity and the love she felt for Griffin. The narrow streets of Charleston, her old neighborhood, welcomed her with the comforting familiarity of a home to which one returns after a long journey. The apartment above the flower shop was exactly as she had left it months ago, though a fine layer of dust covered the furniture. She opened the windows to let in the fresh morning air that was beginning to dawn, and as the golden light gradually flooded the space, she had the certainty she had made the right decision. Distance wasn't a surrender, but an act of courage. Sometimes, to find the way back to the essential, it was necessary to step back and contemplate the complete landscape. The days in Charleston passed with a strange mixture of comforting familiarity and poignant nostalgia. Laurel resumed her routine in the small flower shop, silently thanking Phoebe for having kept it running during her absence. Contact with regular customers, who received her with warm hugs and sincere questions about her well-being, acted as a balm for her confused spirit. Griffin respected her request for space, limiting himself to brief messages oscillating between the professional, updates about the inn, and timid reminders that he missed her. He didn't pressure for an immediate reconciliation, which Laurel deeply appreciated. They both needed this time for reflection. One afternoon, as she prepared a bridal bouquet with orange blossoms and small white roses, the shop bell announced the arrival of an unexpected visitor. Looking up, Laurel found herself facing Eleanor Montgomery, as elegant and intimidating as ever, though there was something different in her expression, a barely perceptible vulnerability she had never shown before. "Mrs. Montgomery," Laurel greeted, trying to hide her surprise. "Can I help you with a floral arrangement?" The woman surveyed the small shop with an evaluative eye before responding. "Actually, Miss Reed, I've come to talk with you. Do you have a moment?" Laurel nodded, indicating to Phoebe to take over while she led Eleanor to the small sitting room in the back, where she occasionally received clients to discuss special orders. She offered coffee, which the woman declined with a polite gesture. "I suppose my visit surprises you," Eleanor began, sitting with that innate elegance that seemed to convert even a simple chair into a throne. "Frankly, it surprises me to find myself here." "If you've come about Griffin," Laurel started. "I've come about my son, yes, but not in the way you imagine," Eleanor interrupted. I've come because, against all odds, it seems you understand him in ways his own family never managed to. The confession, as unexpected as it was disconcerting, left Laurel momentarily speechless. Griffin has changed, the woman continued, and I don't just mean his business decisions, which still seem risky to me, though I must admit they've turned out surprisingly successful. I'm referring to something deeper. For years I watched him gradually become a hardened version of himself, efficient but empty. Since he met you, even amid all the difficulties, he had recovered something I believed lost. Until now. Until now, Laurel repeated, feeling a knot in her stomach. I've dined with him twice this week. He's returning to his old patterns, Laurel. He's making decisions that contradict everything you built together. Yesterday he announced his intention to sell a majority stake in Moonlight Garden Inn to an international conglomerate. The news hit Laurel like a physical punch, selling control of the project they had created together, which represented their deepest values. It was unthinkable. You must be misinformed, she finally responded. Griffin would never do that without consulting me. We're equal partners. Eleanor's expression softened, showing something close to compassion. Legally, dear, you're not. I reviewed the contracts. Your participation is significant but minority. Griffin maintains final decision-making control. The world seemed to totter beneath Laurel's feet. It couldn't be true. They had discussed the business structure at the project's beginning, and although Griffin had contributed the majority of the initial capital, they had verbally agreed that all strategic decisions would be consensual. Or had they? Had she heard what she wanted to hear, ignoring the warning signs? Why are you telling me this? She asked in a barely audible voice. You always made it clear you disapproved of our relationship. Eleanor took a moment before responding, as if carefully selecting each word. Because I've made many mistakes in my life, Laurel. Mistakes that have cost the happiness of people I love. My marriage was a business arrangement that gradually killed any real affection between us. I spent decades prioritizing the surname, the brand, appearances, convincing myself it was the right thing. And when my son finally found something authentic, I tried to destroy it because it threatened the entire belief structure upon which I had built my existence. The words floated in the small space, laden with an emotional weight Laurel would never have expected from this seemingly impenetrable woman. I haven't come to interfere in your personal decisions, Eleanor continued. I've come because, ironically, you now represent the only hope that my son won't repeat my mistakes, the mistakes I myself taught him. The silence that followed was full of implications. Finally, Laurel dared to ask what she really needed to know. Do you really believe I can do something? If Griffin has decided to sell, I believe you're the only person who can remind him of who he really is, beyond the Montgomery surname and all the expectations it entails, Eleanor responded, rising to leave. I've given you much to think about, so I'll withdraw. I only ask that you consider that sometimes walking away out of pride or absolute principles can be as destructive as staying and compromising too much. At the door, she paused a moment, turning to Laurel with an expression that mixed determination and something resembling regret. One last thing, Miss Reed. I never approved of Audrey Harrington and her family's methods. What they did with your project was despicable, even by our world's standards. Perhaps someday I can tell you how I contributed to making that situation unfavorable for them. With those enigmatic words, Eleanor Montgomery left the flower shop, leaving behind her expensive perfume and a deeply disturbed Laurel. That night, alone in her small apartment, Laurel confronted uncomfortable truths about herself. Hadn't she also been guilty of self-deception? She had wanted so badly to believe in the possibility of a perfect balance between their worlds that perhaps she had ignored fundamental practical realities. She had idealized Griffin, expecting a complete transformation that denied the complexity of his history and personality. She recalled her grandmother's words, "True love isn't blind, child. It sees all the flaws and chooses to love anyway," with eyes wide open. As the night progressed, Laurel gradually reached a painful but necessary conclusion. The problem wasn't simply that Griffin was relapsing into old patterns, or that she was clinging to inflexible principles. The real challenge was that they were both trapped in a dance of unexpressed expectations, unconfessed fears, and explicitly unnegotiated commitments. The authenticity they so valued required something neither had fully offered: radical vulnerability. It wasn't enough to share dreams and visions. They also needed to share their shadows, their doubts, their internal contradictions. And for that, they needed to be together, not separate. As dawn began to filter its golden light through the apartment curtains, Laurel made a decision. She would take the first morning train back to the estate. Not to surrender or to confront, but to attempt something much more difficult, building a bridge over the abyss they had allowed to grow between them, a bridge cemented in complete truth, even when that truth proved uncomfortable. Laurel arrived at the estate shortly after noon. The taxi left her at the main entrance, and as she walked the magnolia-flanked path leading to the house, each step resonated with the weight of pending decisions. The gardens looked impeccable, perhaps too perfect, as if technical precision had gradually replaced the natural spontaneity she had always defended in her designs. She didn't find Griffin in the main house. Mrs. Thompson, the housekeeper, informed her he had left early for a meeting in New York and wasn't expected back until evening. The news, instead of discouraging her, provided the space she needed to prepare. She spent the afternoon touring every corner of the gardens they had designed together, collecting specific flowers and branches that held particular meanings for them both. Rosemary from the bush they had planted together on their first day at the estate, jasmine from the pergola where they had celebrated their first anniversary, mountain laurel from the wildest area of the garden where they had so often contemplated the stars. With these elements, she created a floral arrangement completely different from any she had made before. It wasn't technically perfect, nor did it follow conventional aesthetic trends. It was more a visual narrative of their shared history. Each flower, each leaf, each twig deliberately placed to tell part of their journey together. She installed it at the center of the inner courtyard table, where they used to dine on warm nights. Then she prepared a simple dinner: homemade bread, local goat cheese, estate olive oil, regional wine. Honest food without pretensions, representing the authenticity they had valued at the beginning. She was lighting candles when she heard Griffin's car approaching. She took a deep breath, calming the nerves threatening to overwhelm her. This wouldn't be an easy encounter, but it was necessary. Griffin's expression upon finding her in the courtyard transitioned quickly from surprise to caution. With a fleeting flash of joy he tried to conceal. "I wasn't expecting you," he said simply, setting his briefcase on a chair. "We need to talk," Laurel responded, indicating the prepared table. "Really talk, not argue or negotiate, but truly listen to each other." Something in her tone, perhaps the calm determination emanating from her, made Griffin nod without protest. He sat across from her, finally noticing the floral arrangement dominating the table's center. "It's unconventional," he commented, studying the composition with curiosity. "It's our story," she explained. "Each element represents a moment we've shared, from the beginning until now, even the difficult parts." She pointed to a partially dried mountain laurel branch. "This represents the obstacles we've faced, the decisions that hurt us but also made us stronger." The dinner began in an uncomfortable silence that gradually gave way to tentative conversation about everyday matters, the inn's functioning, pending projects, industry news. It was only after the first glass of wine when Laurel finally addressed the true purpose of her visit. "Your mother came to see me yesterday." Griffin nearly choked on his wine. "My mother? In Charleston? It seems we have more in common than either of us would be willing to admit." Laurel briefly smiled before her expression turned serious again. "She told me about your plans to sell control of the inn." The silence that followed was dense, laden with tension. Griffin set his glass on the table with deliberate slowness, as if buying time to formulate a response. "It's a possibility I'm exploring, not a decision made," he finally said. "The Nakamura Group has expressed interest in expanding our concept internationally, with resources we couldn't gather in years." "We?" The word contained both a question and an accusation. "According to your mother, legally, you can make that decision without my consent." Griffin's expression hardened. "Technically that's correct, but I would never do something like that without consulting you. The fact I'm evaluating options doesn't mean I'll exclude you from the decision-making process." "Like you didn't exclude me when you modified my designs for the presentation to investors," Laurel counterattacked, though she tried to maintain a tone more sad than accusatory. The blow hit its target. Griffin looked away, visibly uncomfortable. "That was a lapse in judgment," he admitted. "I was under pressure, wanting to impress them, and I took a shortcut that betrayed our shared vision. I'm sorry." The apology, unexpected and apparently sincere, momentarily disarmed Laurel. She had come prepared for a defensive battle, not for a direct acknowledgement of responsibility. "Griffin, I didn't come here to exchange accusations," she finally said. "I came because I believe we're at a crucial point where our decisions will determine not just the inn's future, but what we are together." "And what exactly are we, Laurel?" The question emerged with a vulnerability he rarely showed. "Because lately I'm not clear. Business partners, occasional lovers, idealists facing market reality. Everything seems confused." The question floated between them, condensing all the uncertainties they had allowed to grow like weeds between what had once been a flourishing garden of shared possibilities. "That's exactly the question, isn't it?" she responded after a moment of reflection. "We never really defined what we wanted to be together, beyond the initial attraction and the excitement of creating something unique. We launched into building a shared dream without clearly agreeing on the rules of the game." Griffin nodded slowly, recognizing the truth in her words. "When I met you, you represented everything I was missing: authenticity, connection with the essential, freedom from others' expectations," he confessed. "But part of me always feared those values were incompatible with real commercial success, with the scale I've always sought in my projects. I've been divided between who I want to be with you and who I was taught to be. And I've been clinging to pure ideals that may not always be practical in the real world," Laurel acknowledged, offering her own vulnerability in exchange. "I've judged your pragmatic decisions as betrayals of our vision, without recognizing that sometimes compromises are necessary to survive and grow." A lightning bolt briefly illuminated the sky, followed by the distant rumble of thunder. The storm that had been forecast was approaching, both literally and metaphorically. "So where does that leave us?" Griffin asked, his gaze fixed on the floral arrangement narrating their shared history. "Is there a middle path we can walk together?" Before Laurel could respond, the first raindrops began to fall thick and heavy, spattering the courtyard floor. In seconds, it transformed into a downpour, threatening to soak the table and ruin dinner. They both rose simultaneously, running to rescue the food, wine, candles. The situation could have been tense, even dramatic, but when their gazes met amid the chaos, something unexpected happened. They began to laugh, a genuine, liberating laugh that acknowledged the moment's absurdity and the perfect metaphor it represented. Two people trying to save what they valued while a relentless storm raged around them. Drenched and breathless, they managed to transfer everything inside the house. Laurel observed with some sadness that the floral arrangement had been partially undone by the rain, some flowers fallen, others dislocated. "We can fix it," Griffin said, noting her expression. "In fact, I think now it's even more representative of our story. A bit messy, imperfect, but with all the essential elements intact." The observation, so simple yet so profound, crystallized something in Laurel's mind. Perhaps that was the key they had been seeking, accepting imperfection as an inherent part of any authentic relationship, understanding that real beauty didn't reside in the immaculate execution of a predefined plan, but in the capacity to adapt together to inevitable storms. "I don't want you to sell the inn," she finally said, drying her wet hair with a towel Griffin had offered her. "But I also don't want you to reject growth opportunities just to maintain conceptual purity. I want us to find our own path, one that honors both your ambitions and my principles." Griffin approached slowly, as if fearing a sudden movement might break the fragile connection beginning to rebuild between them. "What if that perfect path doesn't exist?" he asked with raw honesty. "What if any decision implies sacrificing something valuable?" "Then we'll decide together what to sacrifice and what to preserve," Laurel responded, holding his gaze. "But we'll do it as true partners with total transparency, without hidden agendas or unilateral decisions." Outside, the storm raged with increasing intensity. The wind lashed the magnolias, and the rain beat against the windows as if trying to enter. Inside, however, in the eye of the emotional hurricane they had traversed, a space of calm and clarity was beginning to form where, perhaps, they could rebuild on more solid foundations what ambition, fear, and miscommunication had threatened to destroy. 3 days of incessant rain kept Laurel and Griffin practically isolated at the estate, a circumstance that proved to be exactly what they needed. Far from external distractions, Without meetings or professional commitments, they had time to truly talk, to unearth uncomfortable truths, and gradually rebuild damaged trust. The morning of the fourth day, when the storm finally abated, they breakfasted together on the veranda beneath a washed and brilliant sky. The garden, though partially affected by the weather, already showed signs of recovery, with new shoots emerging from the battered branches. "It's amazing how nature regenerates," Laurel commented, observing a lemon tree that had lost almost all its leaves, but kept its golden fruits intact. "It seems destroyed, and yet life continues, adapting, finding new ways to express itself. Like us," Griffin responded, reaching for her hand across the table. "These days have been transformative." It was true. During the long hours of conversation, they had reached fundamental agreements. Griffin had promised to legally formalize equality in decision-making, modifying the contracts so that no strategic decision could be made unilaterally. Laurel, for her part, had recognized the need for certain standardization if they wanted to expand internationally, though maintaining distinctive elements and local adaptations in each new project. But more important than the practical agreements was the renewed commitment to total honesty, even when that honesty proved painful or uncomfortable. They had established a weekly ritual of unfiltered conversations where they could express concerns, fears, or disagreements in a safe space before these turned into entrenched resentments. "I've been thinking about what my mother said," Griffin commented as he poured more coffee, "about how she sacrificed her own dreams to maintain the family legacy. I had never really considered her perspective before." "Do you know what those dreams were?" Laurel asked with genuine curiosity. "Vaguely. She studied fine arts in Paris, was a promising painter. There are some of her paintings stored in the attic of the family house in Manhattan, incredibly modern for her time, full of color and life. And then she met your father." "And then she met my father." Griffin nodded. "Heir to a traditional hotel empire that needed a suitable wife, not a bohemian artist. She completely transformed her identity, buried the young idealist, and became the perfect Mrs. Montgomery." Laurel reflected on this revelation. Suddenly, many of Eleanor's attitudes acquired new meaning: her rigidity, her insistence on appearances, her initial resistance to her son's relationship with a Charleston florist. "Maybe that's why she came to see me," she finally said. "She doesn't want you to repeat her history, to sacrifice something authentic to maintain appearances or empty traditions." "That would explain her change in attitude," Griffin conceded, "though it's still disconcerting to imagine my mother as an ally of our relationship." "People are more complex than they appear," Laurel smiled. "That's a lesson we've both learned, don't you think?" The conversation drifted to the immediate future. The Nakamura Group's offer remained on the table, but now they contemplated alternative options. A limited collaboration that would allow them to expand while retaining creative control, or developing a very selective franchise model where they could establish rigorous standards to maintain the concept's essence. "I think we should visit Japan before making any decision," Laurel suggested. "Get to know their culture firsthand, understand their approach to nature and gardens. If we're going to collaborate with them, we need to ensure there's a real philosophical compatibility, not just commercial interest." Griffin looked at her with a mixture of admiration and surprise. "A month ago, you would have rejected the idea of any international expansion," he observed. "I like this new Laurel who integrates artistic vision with business pragmatism. And I like this Griffin who doesn't confuse expansion with standardization, who understands that the soul of what we created is as important as its scale," she responded. "I think we're both finding a balance that previously seemed impossible." The morning advanced lazily, the sun gradually drying the garden's moisture, awakening intense aromas of damp earth, rosemary, and lavender. From the veranda, they could observe the gardeners assessing the storm damage, already planning necessary repairs. "There's something else we need to decide," Griffin said, suddenly serious. "Something personal, not professional." The solemn tone alerted Laurel. After days of deep conversations, she believed they had addressed all pending issues. "I'm listening," she responded with some caution. Griffin seemed to momentarily struggle with words, something unusual for someone normally so eloquent. "These days apart made me realize something fundamental," he began. I can live without total control of the inn, I can adapt my business ambitions, I can even face family disapproval if necessary. But I can't imagine my life without you in it, Laurel. Not just as a business partner or occasional companion, but as a permanent and indispensable part of my existence. Laurel's heart leaped as Griffin extracted a small velvet box from his jacket pocket. It's not an impulsive decision, he continued, anticipating her thought. I've been considering this for months, but the storm we've weathered, both literal and metaphorical, has only reinforced my certainty. I want to build a life with you, Laurel Reed, in all its dimensions, with all its challenges and joys. He opened the box, revealing not a conventional diamond ring, as might be expected from someone of his position, but a delicate, artisanal silver ring representing two intertwined branches, with small orange blossoms carved into the metal. I had it made specifically for you, inspired by the patterns you designed for the central garden, he explained, because I wanted it to represent what we are together. Different but complementary, rooted yet continuously blooming. Laurel observed the ring with moist eyes, deeply moved not just by the gesture, but by the thought behind it. It wasn't a symbol of possession or status, like so many expensive jewels she had seen in Griffin's social circles, but an artistic representation of their unique connection. I want to say yes, she finally responded, her voice barely a whisper. But I need to be sure we both understand what this truly means. I'm listening, he said, repeating her earlier words with an understanding smile. It means our commitment is to shared truth, even when that truth makes us uncomfortable. That we promise to create a space where we both can grow without losing our individual essence, that our roots intertwine, but each maintains their own wings. Griffin nodded slowly, absorbing each word. It also means, she continued, that if at any point we lose balance, if either feels they're sacrificing too much of themselves, we'll have the courage to stop and recalibrate, even if that means pausing other projects, because what we are together is more valuable than any external success. I accept those terms, Griffin responded with a solemnity that soon transformed into a luminous smile. In fact, I couldn't have better formulated what I myself feel. So, Laurel Reed, under these sacred conditions, would you share your life with me? For all response, Laurel extended her hand, allowing him to slide the ring onto her finger. The cold metal soon tempered with the warmth of her skin, like a metaphor for how two different elements could fuse in perfect harmony without losing their essential qualities. As they kissed under the morning sun, with the aroma of earth renewed by rain enveloping them, Laurel had the certainty that they had finally found that third path she had intuited. Neither surrender to empty conventions nor rigid adherence to impractical ideals, but a creative synthesis that honored both their roots and their aspirations, both their past and their shared future. Laurel and Griffin's engagement subtly transformed the dynamic of their relationship, not so much through the ring's social symbolism, but through the renewed clarity they had achieved. The following months unfolded in a productive balance between personal and professional projects. Moonlight Garden Inn prospered, attracting travelers from around the world drawn by its unique concept, and they had begun preliminary explorations for a possible expansion in Kyoto, following a revealing trip to Japan. It was during the return from that trip when they received a proposal that would again alter the course of their lives. The plane had just landed in New York after 12 hours of flight, and both were exhausted, but satisfied with the trip's results. A potential alliance with a traditional Japanese family dedicated to preserving historic gardens, who shared their philosophy of authenticity and sustainability. While waiting for their luggage, Griffin received a call he answered with evident surprise, stepping slightly away to hear better amid the airport bustle. When he returned to Laurel, his expression was indecipherable. "Everything okay?" she asked, intrigued by his reaction. "It was Margaret Thornton, the mayor of Blue Ridge Valley," Griffin responded, still processing the received information. "She wants to meet with us tomorrow. Says she has a proposal that might interest us." Blue Ridge Valley? Laurel was perplexed. "In the Shenandoah Mountains. What kind of proposal could she have for us?" She wouldn't give details over the phone, only mentioned something about a rural revitalization project and that she had followed our work at Moonlight Garden Inn with interest. The meeting was set for the following afternoon at the town hall of Blue Ridge Valley, a picturesque municipality nestled in the Shenandoah Mountains, surrounded by one of America's most extensive and best-preserved national parks. The journey from New York was an opportunity to rest from jet lag, while contemplating the changing landscape through the car window, the intense green of coastal regions gradually giving way to the golden Appalachian forests as they approached America's heartland. Margaret Thornton turned out to be an affable woman in her 50s, with the weathered face of someone who had spent a lifetime outdoors and the intelligent gaze of a born strategist. She received them in her office, decorated with simplicity, but featuring impressive photographs of the natural environment surrounding the municipality. "I greatly appreciate your coming on such short notice," she began, after initial greetings and offering coffee. "But when I learned you were returning from Japan, I thought it was the perfect time to present this idea." She unfolded a detailed map of the region on the table and pointed to a specific area on the town's outskirts. "This is Clear Waters Estate, a property of almost 500 acres that belonged to the Whitman family for generations. The last owner passed away 2 years ago without direct heirs, and after a lengthy legal process, the town acquired the property with the specific mandate to dedicate it to projects benefiting the community and preserving its natural and cultural value." She proceeded to show them photographs, a valley protected by imposing mountains, crossed by a crystalline river, with preserved forests and fields dotted with wildflowers. In the center, an old colonial-style house and several auxiliary buildings, all in a state of partial abandonment but with the solidity characteristic of traditional Appalachian construction. "It's impressive," Laurel murmured, feeling an immediate connection with the wild yet welcoming landscape. "But I still don't understand what it has to do with us." The mayor smiled as if she had been expecting precisely this question. "Blue Ridge Valley, like many rural American municipalities, faces a severe depopulation problem," she explained. "Young people emigrate to cities seeking opportunities, schools close for lack of children, artisanal traditions are lost. It's the emptied America that so concerns us nationally." She paused, ensuring she had their full attention before continuing. "What we need aren't temporary solutions like subsidies or ephemeral projects. We need initiatives that generate a sustainable ecosystem of opportunities that reconnect people with the land in a contemporary way that make maintaining rural traditions economically viable. And you believe we can contribute to that," Griffin completed, beginning to envision the conversation's direction. "Exactly. What you've achieved with Moonlight Garden Inn goes far beyond a simple tourist accommodation. You've created a model where nature, tradition, and contemporary hospitality coexist in perfect balance. You've generated qualified jobs, recovered artisanal techniques, valued native flora. That's precisely what Clear Waters Estate needs." "Are you suggesting we build another inn there?" Laurel asked, intrigued but cautious. "Not exactly." The mayor's smile widened. "I'm suggesting something much more ambitious. An international school of sustainable gardening and landscaping, combined with a botanical research center, residencies for artists and artisans, and yes, a small boutique inn for visitors and students. A complete ecosystem that generates knowledge, attracts international talent, and creates opportunities for the local population." The proposal hung in the air, as unexpected as it was fascinating. Laurel and Griffin exchanged glances, each processing the implications from their particular perspective. "It's an extraordinary concept," Griffin acknowledged, "but also extremely complex. It would require significant investments, institutional collaborations, a multidisciplinary team." "Precisely why I thought of you," the mayor responded. "You've demonstrated the capacity to gather resources, manage complex projects, create synergies among diverse actors. The town would contribute the property under very favorable conditions and facilitate all administrative procedures. There are also specific federal funds for rural revitalization that we could jointly request." "Can we visit the property?" Laurel asked, her mind already beginning to visualize possibilities, imagining how that natural space could be transformed while respecting its essence. "Certainly," Margaret responded, checking her watch. "We still have a few hours of daylight. If it suits you, we can go right now." The tour of Clear Waters Estate exceeded all the expectations the photographs had generated. The property was a microcosm of Appalachian biodiversity, from riparian forests along the river to alpine meadow zones, passing through abandoned orchards where native fruit trees still grew. The main house, built in the 19th century, retained intact architectural elements of great value: hand-carved wooden ceilings, a perfectly preserved underground wine cellar, inner courtyards where time seemed to have stopped. While Margaret explained the place's history, pointing out features and possibilities, Laurel moved slightly away from the group, attracted by something that had caught her attention in a corner of the back garden. Under a centuries-old oak tree, partially hidden by vines and weeds, she discovered the remains of what appeared to have been a traditional medicinal garden. She recognized some plants that had survived abandonment: rosemary, sage, wild echinacea, goldenrod, organized according to a pattern reminiscent of old monastic gardens. "This is extraordinary," she murmured to herself, kneeling to examine more closely a plant she didn't immediately recognize. It could be an 18th or 19th century garden, preserved almost intact. "It was my grandmother's pride," said a voice behind her. Laurel turned, surprised. An elderly woman of fragile appearance but vivacious gaze observed her from the path. She hadn't seen her approach. "Sorry, I didn't mean to intrude," Laurel apologized, standing up. "I'm Laurel Reed. We're visiting the property with the mayor." "I know perfectly well who you are, young lady," the elderly woman smiled. "I'm Winifred Whitman, the last owner's sister. I live in town, but I still come almost every day. Some habits are hard to break at my age." Laurel introduced herself formally, intrigued by this unexpected appearance that hadn't been mentioned by the mayor. "You said this garden was your grandmother's." The elderly woman nodded, approaching with slow but sure steps. "Hazel Whitman, one of the last traditional herbalists of the Appalachians. She knew each plant, its properties, when to collect it, how to prepare it. This garden nourished not just our family, but the entire town. People came from miles around seeking her remedies." The conversation continued as Winifred guided Laurel through the abandoned garden, identifying plants that to an inexperienced eye would simply be weeds, explaining their uses, sharing anecdotes about how her grandmother had employed them to treat everything from childhood fevers to chronic ailments of the elderly. It was a living knowledge but in danger of extinction, a wisdom orally transmitted for generations that now resided solely in this woman's memory. When Griffin and the mayor found them, the connection between Laurel and Winifred was already evident. They shared a passion for plants that transcended generational or cultural differences. "I see you've met Miss Winifred," the mayor smiled. "I should have guessed she'd be around. She's our living memory, Clearwater's estate's unofficial guardian. She was showing me her grandmother's medicinal garden," Laurel explained, with an enthusiasm she couldn't contain. "It's an incalculable botanical and historical treasure, not just for the species themselves, but for the traditional knowledge associated with them." The return to New York that night was silent, both immersed in their own thoughts, processing not just the mayor's formal proposal, but all the possibilities Clearwater's estate had awakened in their imagination. It was a radically different project from anything they had contemplated before, which would require not just economic investment, but a profound personal commitment, possibly a significant change in lifestyle. It was only upon reaching the hotel, while sharing a light dinner in the room, when they finally verbalized their impressions. "I think we should do it," Laurel said without preamble, surprising even herself with the certainty in her voice. "It's a huge change," Griffin responded, not with rejection but with the reasonable caution that balanced his partner's idealism. "It would mean dividing our time between New York and Blue Ridge Valley, at least during the initial phase. It would involve learning about completely new fields for us: education, scientific research, cultural management." "I know," Laurel nodded. "And precisely because of that, I feel it's the right path. It's not simply replicating what we already know how to do. It's evolving towards something that integrates everything we value: sustainability, traditional knowledge, responsible innovation, community revitalization." Griffin observed her with that mixture of admiration and amazement he still frequently felt, even after years together. "When I saw you talking with Miss Winifred in that abandoned garden," he confessed, "I had a sort of vision. I imagined you 20 years in the future, sharing your knowledge with young students from around the world, preserving ancestral techniques while innovating in sustainable solutions. And it seemed perfect." "So?" Hope shone in Laurel's eyes. "So let's do it," Griffin concluded with a smile that reflected both determination and enthusiasm. but let's do it right. We'll need a detailed plan, appropriate partners, diversified financing to not depend exclusively on public funds that might fluctuate with political changes. As the conversation advanced, gradually transforming into a brainstorm about possible approaches and collaborations, Laurel felt a deep certainty taking root inside her. Clearwater's estate wasn't simply a new professional project. It was the natural next chapter in their shared story, an opportunity to create something that would transcend their own lives, a legacy that would combine the best of both worlds. The following 18 months were a whirlwind of activity that tested all of Laurel and Griffin's skills and resources. Converting the vision of Clearwater's estate into reality required complex negotiations, exhaustive research, constant travel between New York, Washington, D.C. and Blue Ridge Valley, nights working until dawn, and an unshakable determination in the face of seemingly insurmountable obstacles. The project had grown in ambition and scope as more collaborators joined. Universities interested in establishing research programs, cultural foundations attracted by the component of preserving traditional knowledge, technology companies willing to implement innovative, sustainable solutions. What had begun as a bold but relatively contained idea had transformed into a complex ecosystem of interconnected initiatives requiring meticulous management. They established their temporary base in a small house in town, which they renovated respecting the traditional architecture, but adapting it to their contemporary needs. A spacious studio where Laurel could work on her landscape designs, an office equipped with technology allowing Griffin to maintain video conferences with international collaborators, a backyard where they experimented with plant cultivations they would potentially integrate into Clearwater's estate gardens. The relationship with Miss Winifred Whitman had become a fundamental pillar of the project. The elderly woman, initially wary of the magnitude of changes proposed for the family property, had found in Laurel a spiritual heir, someone who genuinely valued the traditional knowledge she treasured. They spent hours traversing the Appalachian landscape, identifying medicinal plants, documenting ancestral uses, creating an exhaustive catalogue that would preserve this wisdom for future generations. It was during one of these botanical expeditions when something unexpected occurred. They had ascended to a remote area of the mountain, following the trail of a variety of black cohosh that, according to Winifred, had superior anti-inflammatory properties to common varieties. The day was perfect. Clear sky, pleasant temperature, nature in full spring splendor. After collecting samples and documenting the habitat, they sat to rest on a rock formation that offered panoramic views of the valley. "This place was always special for our family," Winifred commented, her voice tinged with nostalgia as she contemplated the landscape. "My grandfather used to say that here he felt closer to heaven than to earth." Laurel nodded, perfectly understanding the sensation. There was something in that natural lookout that inspired reverence, an almost spiritual connection with the surroundings. "Winifred," she began after a moment of shared silence, "there's something I want to consult with you, something personal." The elderly woman looked at her with that mixture of insight and patience only years can bestow. "Griffin and I are considering—" Laurel searched for the right words. "We're thinking about starting a family, having children. But with the project in full development, I wonder if it's the right time, if I'll be able to balance motherhood with all these responsibilities." The confession had emerged spontaneously, verbalized for the first time in that space that seemed to invite confidences. It was a subject that had begun to occupy her thoughts in recent months, especially observing how some local workers occasionally brought their small children, who ran happily through Clearwater's estate grounds, while their parents participated in restoration work. Winifred kept silent for a few moments, her gaze lost in the landscape's immensity, as if consulting with the ancestral wisdom of those mountains. "My grandmother Hazel," she finally began, "had 8 children. While raising them, she tended the medicinal garden, cared for the town's sick, managed the property, and still found time to teach young women interested in learning about medicinal plants. When once asked how she managed, she simply replied, 'Plants teach us that life isn't a choice between flowering or bearing fruit. It's a cycle where each phase has its own purpose and beauty.'" The analogy resonated deeply with Laurel. It was true that nature didn't establish artificial dichotomies between personal growth and perpetuation. All phases were integrated in a coherent and harmonious cycle. Besides, Winifred continued with a mischievous smile, what better place to raise children than Clearwater's estate? Unlimited space to explore, direct contact with nature, a diverse community of people passionate about creating a better world. Many would pay fortunes to offer such an environment to their children. The return to town that afternoon had a different aspect for Laurel. She observed the surroundings with renewed eyes, imagining what it would be like for a child to grow up in that natural paradise, learning directly from the earth, developing an instinctive understanding of natural cycles, surrounded by people committed to sustainability and cultural preservation. The conversation with Griffin that night, seated before the fireplace while a spring storm lashed the windows, flowed with a naturalness that dispelled her initial fears. "I've been thinking the same," he confessed, surprising her, especially seeing how this project is evolving into something that transcends the professional. It's not just a business, it's a legacy, a community, a lifestyle. I'd like our children to be part of it, to grow up understanding that another world is possible. The following months acquired a different rhythm, while they continued coordinating the multiple aspects of Clearwater's estate's development: restoration of historic buildings, recovery of traditional gardens, implementation of sustainable technologies. Laurel and Griffin incorporated an additional element into their planning: preparation for a family. They adapted one of the main house's dependencies as a future children's room. They designed a small educational garden where children could learn about cultivation cycles and biodiversity. They established contact with the town school, collaborating on programs that brought local students to Clearwater's estate for formative activities, sowing the seeds of what would eventually become an innovative educational center linked to the project. It was during the ceremony laying the first stone of the International Center for Botanical and Landscape Studies, with local and regional authorities present, representatives from collaborating universities, and media covering the event, when Laurel felt the first physical confirmation of the new life growing inside her, a subtle movement but unmistakable, like a butterfly gently fluttering its wings. In the midst of her speech about the importance of preserving traditional knowledge while innovating for a sustainable future, she made a pause imperceptible to the audience, her hand briefly resting on her belly in an instinctive gesture of protection and connection. Griffin, beside her, looked at her curiously, perceiving something special in that unexpected pause. She responded with a complicit smile that contained a whole universe of shared meanings. That night, as they celebrated the event's success with a small group of close collaborators, in the newly restored courtyard of the main house, under stars that shone with particular intensity in the clear Appalachian sky, Griffin proposed a final toast. "To Clearwater's estate," he began, raising his glass, "to this shared dream that's blooming thanks to the effort of everyone present." And, he added, looking directly at Laurel with eyes moist with emotion, "to the new seeds we plant today and the fruits we'll harvest tomorrow." Only Winifred, with intuition sharpened by decades of observing natural cycles, understood the double meaning of that toast. Her gaze crossed with Laurel's in a silent exchange of feminine complicity that transcended generations. Later, when everyone had departed and night silence enveloped Clearwater's estate, Laurel and Griffin walked hand in hand along the paths of the old medicinal garden, now partially recovered. The full moon illuminated the plants with an almost supernatural silvery clarity, creating a magical setting that seemed suspended outside conventional time. "When did you know?" Griffin asked, his voice barely a whisper so as not to disturb the night's quietude. "I suspected for weeks," she confessed. "I confirmed yesterday, but today I felt it move for the first time, just as I was speaking about continuity and renewal, as if it wanted to participate in the conversation." Griffin stopped, turning to look at her completely. His expression contained such a mixture of vulnerability and strength, of fear and determination, of gratitude and amazement, that Laurel felt a wave of love so intense it was almost painful. "This," he said, encompassing with a gesture the night landscape, the property, the project, but also the intangible space between them where their connection resided, "is the greatest gift we could offer to a child. Not just a physical place, but a way of understanding life, a community of values, a shared purpose." Laurel nodded, perfectly understanding. Her hand joined Griffin's over her belly, where the seed of their shared future was beginning its own cycle of blooming, nourished by deep roots extending far beyond themselves, toward the ancestral past represented by Winifred, and toward a future they were just beginning to glimpse. In that moment, under the starry Shenandoah sky, with the aroma of medicinal plants floating in the night breeze and the distant river's murmur as soundtrack, Clearwater's estate ceased to be simply an ambitious professional project. It transformed into the setting of their family story, the fertile ground where they would sow not just botanical knowledge and cultural traditions, but also the values they hoped to transmit to future generations: respect for nature, valuing traditional knowledge, responsible innovation, and above all the understanding that true wealth resides in the balance between deep roots and strong wings. 5 years after that starry night when they shared the news of their first child, Clearwater's estate had transformed into a reality that surpassed even the most optimistic visions of its founders. What began as a bold gamble to revitalize a forgotten corner of rural America had become an international model of sustainable development, attracting visitors, students, and researchers from around the world. The International Center for Botanical and Landscape Studies literally flourished, with 3 graduated classes from its master's program in Traditional Gardens and Contemporary Sustainability. The small boutique inn, installed in restored dependencies of the original house, maintained a permanent waiting list. The old stables now housed workshops where local artisans transmitted traditional techniques to apprentices arriving from countries as distant as Japan or Canada. The medicinal garden, meticulously reconstructed following Winifred Whitman's knowledge, had been recognized by UNESCO as intangible cultural heritage. But for Laurel, contemplating the sunset from the natural lookout where years before she had shared her concerns with Winifred, Clearwater's estate's true miracle didn't reside in these tangible achievements, impressive as they were. The authentic miracle now ran downhill before her. Nathan, 4.5 years old, with dark hair inherited from his father and his mother's expressive eyes, chasing butterflies with the absolute concentration only children can maintain. A few meters away, Griffin held in his arms Evelyn, barely 10 months old, pointing out to her the different hues the mountains adopted in the twilight light. This everyday image, extraordinary in its simple perfection, was the most valuable fruit of all the decisions, sacrifices, and risks assumed throughout their joint path. The sound of approaching steps momentarily pulled her from her contemplation. Winifred Whitman, now in her 80s yet maintaining surprising vitality, sat beside her on the flat rock that served as a natural bench. "I knew I'd find you here," the elderly woman smiled. "You always come to this place when you need to think, or simply to give thanks," Laurel responded, returning the smile. "Today marks exactly 5 years since we confirmed Nathan was on his way. It seems like yesterday, and at the same time like an entire lifetime." Both observed in silence how Nathan, after momentarily capturing a butterfly between his hands, released it with extreme care, following the lesson his mother had instilled in him since his first steps: admire natural beauty without possessing it. "Have you made a decision about the Department of Agriculture's offer?" Winifred asked after a moment, referring to the recent proposal to replicate the Clearwater's estate model in other American regions affected by rural depopulation. "We're inclined to accept, but with conditions," Laurel responded. "We don't want to create identical franchises, but adapt the concept to the cultural and ecological characteristics of each region. And we can't personally direct each project. We need to form local teams that share our philosophy, but contribute their own vision." Winifred nodded with approval. She had witnessed how Laurel and Griffin had evolved professionally and personally, finding an increasingly harmonic balance between ambition and authenticity, between expansion and depth. "Last week, while working in the herbarium with students," the elderly woman commented, "I had a thought I want to share with you. We were classifying plants according to their life cycles, annuals, biennials, perennials, and I realized that what you've built here is like a perennial garden, but with a special quality." "What quality?" Laurel asked, intrigued. "Traditional perennial gardens maintain their basic structure year after year, with plants returning each season. But what you've created is what I would call a perpetual garden. It doesn't just maintain itself, but constantly evolves, integrates new elements, adapts to changing circumstances, and most importantly, sows seeds that will germinate long after the original gardeners are gone. The metaphor resonated deeply with Laurel. It was true that Clearwater's estate had surpassed the limits of a personal or professional project to become something that would live beyond its founders. The students formed there took their knowledge to other places. The research conducted in its laboratories inspired similar initiatives in distant regions. The children of the town, including their own, grew with an intuitive understanding of sustainability that would shape their future decisions. Griffin approached with Evelyn in his arms, followed by Nathan, who proudly held a small bouquet of wildflowers he had collected for his Grandma Winnie, as he affectionately called the elderly woman. The family scene, framed by the majestic landscape of the Appalachians bathed in golden light, crystallized everything they had managed to build together. "What's worrying you?" Griffin asked Laurel in a low voice, perceptive as always to her moods, while Nathan enthusiastically explained to Winifred the names of the flowers he had collected, demonstrating a surprising botanical knowledge for his age. "It's not worry," she responded, intertwining her fingers with his. "It's awareness of how fragile and at the same time strong everything we've built is, of how each decision we make, even seemingly small ones, can have repercussions we can't imagine. Like accepting that invitation to decorate the inauguration of a hotel in Charleston," Griffin smiled, recalling the moment that had initiated their shared history. "Or like taking a risk on hiring an unknown florist from the historic district," she replied, following the game. The moment was interrupted by Evelyn, who extended her tiny arms toward her mother, demanding attention. Laurel took her, marveling as always at the diminutive perfection of her fingers, the softness of her skin, the absolute confidence in her gaze. "Mum, can we plant my bouquet in my special garden?" Nathan asked, approaching with a hopeful expression. The special garden was a small corner Laurel had designated for her son in the experimental nursery, where he could plant whatever he wanted and learn through direct experience. It was significant that the boy preferred to transplant the flowers instead of keeping them in a vase, instinctively understanding that their beauty was more valuable when they remained alive, growing, forming part of the natural cycle. "Of course, sweetheart," she responded. "We'll do it together early tomorrow." As they returned along the path toward the main house, where a shared dinner with resident students and researchers awaited them, a weekly tradition that fostered informal exchange of knowledge, Laurel reflected on the nature of true success. It wasn't the international recognition Clearwater's estate had received, nor the economic security they had managed to build, nor even the measurable positive impact on the local community. Real success resided in the coherence between their deepest values and the life they had created, in the capacity to transmit those values not through speeches, but through daily example, in having found a purpose that transcended individual benefit to contribute to a common good, and in the inner peace that came from living in harmony with nature and with their own principles. When they reached the main house, the courtyard was already prepared for dinner. Artisanal lanterns illuminated the space with a warm and welcoming light. The long table made from reclaimed wood from an old tobacco barn was arranged with simple elegance, and the aromas of traditional cooking mingled with the perfume of the garden's night flowers. The diners, a heterogeneous mixture of ages, nationalities, and specialties that characterized the Clearwater's estate community, rose to greet them. Among them, several new faces stood out. The three finalists selected to direct the first project inspired by Clearwater's estate that would be implemented in an Alaskan region, following the model they had developed. The dinner proceeded in that atmosphere of intellectual and personal camaraderie they so valued. Passionate conversations about ancestral botany, exchange of cultural experiences, shared laughter, and above all, that sense of belonging to something greater than the sum of the present individualities. Nathan and Evelyn, far from being separated from these gatherings, participated in their own way. The boy listened attentively to the stories of visiting researchers about exotic plants from their countries of origin, while Evelyn passed from lap to lap, receiving cooing in half a dozen different languages. Toward the end of the evening, when traditional desserts made with orchard fruits had been served, and the local artisanal bourbon began to exhaust its capacity to stimulate conversations, Olivia Lancaster, the brilliant ethnobotanist who would coordinate the academic program the following semester, proposed a toast, To Laurel and Griffin, she began, raising her glass, who have taught us that true sustainability isn't just about agricultural techniques or renewable energies, but an integral way of understanding our relationship with the environment and with others, of connecting past and future, tradition and innovation, the local and the global, in a constant and fruitful dialogue. Glasses rose under the starry sky, while the gathered community celebrated not just two people, but the vision they had materialized against all odds. Later that night, when the children slept peacefully and the house had fallen silent, Laurel and Griffin retreated to their favorite corner, a small private veranda from where they could contemplate both the valley and the night sky. Seated on a centuries-old stone bench, wrapped in a shared blanket against the early morning coolness, they revisited moments of the day, as was their custom. "Do you remember when we met?" Griffin suddenly asked, his voice barely a whisper so as not to disturb the night's peace. "When you handed me that white rose at the Magnolia Springs Hotel inauguration?" "Perfectly," Laurel smiled, leaning against his shoulder. "I thought you were the most arrogant man I'd ever met. And I thought you were too idealistic to survive in the real world." Griffin laughed softly. "We were both wrong, and both right at the same time. You were idealistic, but that idealism, far from being a weakness, became our greatest strength." Laurel reflected on the observation, surprised as always by Griffin's capacity to synthesize complex concepts in precise phrases. "I think what we learned," she finally responded, "is that ideals without practical action are sterile, but action without ideals lacks soul." Each needed what the other contributed. The silence that followed was full of shared meaning, of mutual recognition of the path traveled. From that first encounter in Charleston to this moment at Clearwater's estate, they had traversed challenges that could have destroyed both their personal relationship and their professional collaboration. However, each crisis had strengthened their bond, deepened their mutual understanding, and refined their shared vision. "What would you say has been the most valuable thing from this entire journey?" Griffin asked after a time, genuinely interested in Laurel's perspective. She meditated on the response, observing the stars that seemed exceptionally bright that night. "Transformation," she finally said. "Not just what we've prompted in this place, in the people who have passed through here, in the communities that have been inspired by our model, but the inner transformation, our own evolution. We've grown together without losing our individual essence. We've allowed ourselves to change, adapt, learn, without betraying our fundamental values. Like the plants you so love," Griffin observed, "that adapt to their environment without ceasing to be faithful to their essential nature." "Exactly," Laurel nodded. "And like them, we've discovered that true resilience doesn't consist in remaining rigid and immutable, but in knowing how to bend without breaking, in finding new ways to express what we are when circumstances change." The night breeze brought with it the aroma from the medicinal herb garden, that space they had reconstructed, following Winifred's teachings, and that now served both as a living laboratory for students and a source of natural remedies for town inhabitants. "You know what Nathan told me this afternoon, while collecting those flowers for Winifred?" Laurel commented, recalling the moment. "He asked me if he could be a plant healer when he grows up, because he wants to help them be happy so they can help people. A future ethnobotanist." Griffin smiled with paternal pride, "though something tells me he'll reinvent the profession in his own way." "As we reinvented our own paths," Laurel nodded. "That's perhaps the most valuable lesson we can transmit to them. The freedom to create their own definitions of success, of contribution, of purpose." They remained silent again, contemplating the sleeping valley beneath the moon's silvery light. Every corner of that landscape now contained shared memories, materialized dreams, overcome challenges. Clearwater's estate had become much more than a project or a home. It was the tangible manifestation of their love story, the canvas where they had expressed their joint vision of the world. "Tomorrow will be a busy day," Griffin murmured, aware of the agenda awaiting them. Meetings with the Alaskan candidates, the visit of a university delegation, the class Laurel would teach to graduate students on integrating native species into urban landscapes. "Every day is," she responded with a tranquil smile. "And yet each brings with it new discoveries, unexpected connections, small everyday epiphanies, like those wild seeds that find their way to the garden without having been intentionally planted, contributing diversity and resilience to the whole. Griffin gently kissed her forehead, recognizing in that apparently simple observation the profound wisdom that characterized his life partner. Over the years, he had learned to value that unique capacity Laurel had for finding transcendent lessons in nature's most everyday details. "It's late," he finally said, standing and extending his hand to help her rise. "And tomorrow, indeed, the perpetual garden will require new care." As they walked back into the house, Laurel paused a moment to contemplate one last time the night landscape. The moon illuminated the mountain's contours, the river gleamed like a silver ribbon in the distance, and Clearwater's estate gardens seemed to breathe with their own life beneath the starry mantle. In that moment of contemplation, she felt a deep certainty that transcended any residual doubt or fear. They had found their place in the world, not just geographically, but existentially. A space where each facet of their identities could fully express itself, where the apparent contradiction between different worlds transformed into fertile complementarity, where love, for the earth, for knowledge, for community, and between them, acted as the integrating force giving cohesion and meaning to all their actions. With that certainty rooted in the depths of her being, Laurel intertwined her fingers with Griffin's and crossed the threshold of their shared home, ready for the rest that would renew their strength to continue the next day the permanent and unfinished task of cultivating a perpetual garden, one that would flourish long after its original creators had become part of nature's eternal cycle, nourishing with their essence the roots of generations to come. Because ultimately, as she had discovered throughout their extraordinary joint journey, that was the true meaning of transformation, not just being transformed by love, but becoming agents of transformation who expand their circles of influence like ripples in a pond, touching distant shores they might never personally see. And in that understanding resided the deepest peace, the most authentic satisfaction, knowing they had fully honored the gift of their intertwined lives, creating something beautiful and meaningful that would transcend the brevity of individual existence to nourish humanity's eternal garden in its constant search for balance, beauty, and harmony.